Welcome to the Tesla Economist. Please hit the thumbs up and remember to subscribe. You can follow me on Twitter and talk to me on Patreon. Can Tesla reach 20 million vehicles a year? We really do have some fantastic timelines we can work with now, since so much of the direction of this company has been revealed lately in the Q2 earnings call and on the shareholders meeting. We've been given real numbers we can use to play with and get all sorts of potential results here. Okay, this is just for the auto side of the business actually. When I think about it, very little has been said about the future of the energy business. Anyway, some of the numbers that stuck out for me were the fact that each factory will have a capacity of between 1.5 million and 2 million vehicles a year, and the fact Tesla say they will need about a dozen locations to reach their 20 million a year annual run rate. Now, there is this idea that Tesla's growth will exceed 20 million, and by even earlier than 2030. Now, what an absurd notion from these Tesla hyperballs, you might think. Well, is it? For starters, a lot of the expected growth is based on our magic 50%, despite Tesla's track record being 71% since 2016. Growth can become harder when you get larger, although at the same time, you gain more resources, experience, improved technology, and leverage. Also, might I remind you that Elon actually expected 100% growth for a couple of years, except they got hit by COVID and supply chains and lockdowns, etc. So we never did get to feel the 100% growth years, unfortunately. But Tesla still managed 50% growth despite all those setbacks and challenges. However, has it occurred to anyone that those 100% years have potentially just been delayed and may even still come, or something not far off like 80% at least? This might be what the 4680 ramp is all about. As soon as that gets going, then we should see this massive initial growth. Although China has grown at such a rate, any percentage of that is now significantly larger. But I'm not alone in thinking Tesla might exceed 2.5 million cars next year. If they have 4680 in high volume production by the end of this year and no black swan events, then 70% growth is possible next year, coming in at 2.5 million, and then potentially in 2024 again, taking production to over 4 million. If we can get some of this earlier growth rate at 70% or so, then it will mean the future percentage growth will have that much more impact. In fact, if Tesla hit 1.5 million this year, and 70% for 2023 and 2024, then we're at 4.3 million deliveries in 2024. From there, it is a consistent 30% increase in deliveries to hit the 20 million a year milestone, which has given me another idea. This growth likely will not be consistent. Sure, all factories will be continually ramping, but they may end up hitting their actual capacities at this 1.5 to 2 million a year run rate, which would probably take about 2 to 3 years to reach. The growth will not be consistent, even if there will be an average of 50% over the next few years, but we will also know that 50% is not going to be consistent either, as if it was, by 2030, Tesla would hit about 40 million a year run rate, which is why some people think Tesla might end up producing 40 million vehicles a year. You can see how they got there now. And yes, Tesla would have enough demand for 40 million vehicles a year if they wanted. I'm actually trying to put together another model to demonstrate that too. I just need to get my head around it first. Let's be realistic here then. What if we start with 70% growth rate for next year, which, like we said, is certainly possible, especially given all the setbacks 2022's given us, but production should be strong by the start of the year with a really solid run rate and new factory in production. Then another new factory to start production in 2023 as well, of which the location is meant to be announced this year. But what if the growth rate for 2024 did slow down? What if 2023 saw 70%, but then 2024 only saw 60% growth? As every year Tesla's production has grown to such a scale, it will become harder to increase at larger rates. So how about if every year of production we reduce the growth by 10%? If we did that, then 2027 would see 30% growth from 2026. And from the rest of the decade, it would only need to average 25% growth to reach a total of 20 million a year run rate by 2030. I think I really like that trend. It sounds more likely and believable, but can we back it up? It's one thing just writing down arbitrary numbers to fit your confirmation bias, but it's another to actually work out how this can be achieved. So I'll start by making a set of rules. We will limit Fremont at 750,000 a year, Shanghai at 2 million, But of course, Tesla could always decide to retrofit those factories sometime and increase output there, as they are not the new products. They are the old ones. As for the rest, they'll be limited to 1.5 to 2 million vehicles a year, and we will say that it takes around 3 years to get to that stage. Although there are likely to be potential major advances over this period, we will stick with these anyway. And yes, Elon said manufacturing could be 10 to 100 times faster perhaps, but I think he was mainly referring to battery cell production when he said that on Battery Day. We will do this by adding a new location every year until we reach a total of 12. 12 was the number of locations required to hit 20 million a year, according to Elon. Alright, so for each of these years, we need to estimate how much is coming from each factory, and then we'll know how many factories Tesla need to build in order to achieve this growth. And that might give us a good idea on how possible it all is. Remember, they're also hopefully going to be building new factories for energy, robots, and other products too. It's not just a car company. In other words, they'll have a lot on, as well as these car factories. Alright, so we'll start with 2022. I've just put in some rough production numbers for these factories, just for indicative purposes. These are not necessarily my estimates, these are numbers I'm just going to place in order to see if this model is possible, and to get an idea of how possible 20 million vehicles a year will be. However, I've got to say, it's really hard trying to make these 2023 numbers fit into 2.5 million deliveries, even with 70% growth. We might have to review 2023 sometime. Of course, the same for 2024, and well, you get the idea, sandbagging. But anyway, I'll just say it again, that is not the purpose of this model. We're trying to work out what it will take for Tesla to reach 20 million. In doing this, it really didn't feel right trying to squeeze in the smaller numbers in the earlier years. And then for the later years, well, I had to choose a factory ramp speed that also feels a bit too slow, but that was what we needed to fit into our model. Obviously, Berlin and Texas didn't get off to the best start, but I think it highly likely that the next factories after will not have the same issues and should really ramp up even faster than Shanghai did. But to fit this model, I'm putting in rough numbers of how much each factory will ramp up over the years. But this is what happens when you try and force numbers into a predetermined model, rather than actually calculating proper forecasts, which once again was not the purpose of this model. But alright, we probably could do a model like that sometime soon. I think in reality, a new factory should be hitting 1.5 to 2 million a year run rate within 3 years of production. Remember, some of these sites also will require future expansion and development. Okay, now I've entered all the numbers, or forced perhaps might be a more apt term. Remember, these are an approximation of the number of units Tesla need to produce out of each factory and how they will ramp over this decade. Well, it's certainly giving us a lot of information here. I think the way it will go is actually quite clear. In order to reach 20 million, entering the numbers for the first few years, I strongly felt I had to wind down the numbers in order to make them fit. Whereas towards the end, I had to end up expanding the numbers more than I felt was right. And I even went over 2 million capacities in a few factories just to make it fit, even though they should only be averaging about 1.7 million each overall. However, remember, there is a delay with ramping. One issue I had was once these factories had reached their alleged capacities and there was no more growth from them, as the number of these factories increased and reached capacity, obviously to increase growth by 30% or so becomes significantly more difficult as the run rate becomes much higher. For example, a run rate of 3 million compared to 8 million, to increase by 30% is a difference of 1 million additional a year compared to finding 2.4 million additional units a year. And if the older factories are at capacity and no longer expanding, then it can only be achieved by new factories. And we only have Tesla building one factory a year. Therefore, this would mean that either the older factories would have to still see some growth, even after hitting these alleged capacities, or that Tesla would build more than one factory a year. And remember, we did base this on Tesla building just one factory a year over the rest of the decade to reach 20 million units. I actually did have to add 2 factory builds in 2030 though, in order to hit the 12 locations. So what does this tell me? I think we are going to see much higher growth in the next few years, and it should then slow down over the following years. I think I will do another version of a breakdown of the production from these factories of how I actually see it being more likely, with a proper forecast. But this model has still served a purpose of showing more light on how Tesla can achieve 20 million a year by the end of the decade, and what is required to do so. Also, remember, despite slower growth in the second half of the decade, that is of course just for auto sales. We might expect energy and other areas to start ramping up around that stage, which means revenue and profits could keep growing at the same insane growth rates. Thanks for listening. Please hit the thumbs up and subscribe. You can follow me on Twitter and talk to me on Patreon.